Well, thanks again, Your Worship. And what I'm going to do, because we have two policy documents that we're going to leave with you after the presentation and share with the community here. One of them is really on fees, and we're just going to touch on that very briefly. And I'm going to pass that over to George, and he's going to come up. I think there's 9 points. He'll be through them in less than 3 minutes. Pardon me, but I would like to ask a question, and that is there anyone in the room that would not pay $50 if that's what the cost was to put your wife, your brother, your mother in an airplane or a helicopter from the airport to fly them to safety? Is there anyone, please speak up, if you would not pay $50? And the answer, of course, is no, Your Worship. And the good news is the cost here is about $20 a person. That's assuming zero contribution to commercial tax based on the fees. And it's really important to understand that. Again, essential service, infrastructure costs money. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that only 5% of the airports in Canada cover 100% of their operating costs. And 100% of those 5% are airports with scheduled passenger service at the right volume. The airport is infrastructure, and it will always have a burden on the community, offset by the benefit to the community. We like to say that the social economic benefit must exceed the social economic cost, but if you're striving towards zero cost, that's a great initiative. The goal is to increase revenue, reduce the cost, but there will always be a cost unless you can break the 5% model out of 1,000 public airports. So having said that, I'd like to bring George up. He's just going to make our 9 recommendations, and then I will talk you through noise because I think we have a great solution for how to get towards or work towards some middle ground for noise. Is that all right? Thank you, Your Worship.
George Farrington. I work for COPA. I'm not going to talk about who we are and who we are as an organisation because my colleague has done that so well. I have 7 points and I'll try to stick to 3 minutes. The first point, fee structures. Fees at an airport should really be structured around protecting essential services and avoiding the discouragement of aviation activity that supports airport viability. I think that's a pretty essential one. The airport needs to remain viable. The fees shouldn't stand in the way of that. Airport fees should only be really established where they are necessary, justified, and proportionate to the legitimate infrastructure and operating requirements. Unnecessary fees are just unnecessary. They should be proportional, they should be reasonable, and there should be a good impact on the airport. Third point is that meaningful consultation and transparent disclosure rationale, cost drivers, and anticipated impacts occur before significant fees are made. It is one thing to implement the fees, it is another thing to consult the many users of the airport, the local area, that will be impacted by those fees. The fourth point that I'd like to bring up is new or increased fees be benchmarked against comparable airports and assessed for competitiveness for the broader industry context. Now, location is obviously an incredibly important thing when it comes to an airport, and that will determine where a business is based, but also competitiveness with those fees and how they would reflect with airports in the area. Also, just a quick point on that, a differentiation between those based at the airport, because those based at the airport are already buying fuel, they're already purchasing hangars or tie-downs, those that are visiting as a way of bringing revenue from those visitors, but then also the private operators and the commercial operators. There should be a differentiation between the two. It is very important that we do not want to drive away the essential service by any means. It is obviously very important for funding, but it is also good to differentiate the numbers between private and commercial flights. Material fee increases or newly introduced fee increases should be phased in over time. Transport Canada is trying to increase their fees. They haven't done so in decades. It is difficult on businesses and operators to start bearing the burden of fees significantly increased in a short period of time. They should be phased to allow for businesses and users to be able to come to terms with those new fees. Last 2 points, airport operators consider the full range of airport-related revenue sources, including training, commercial activity, tenant activity, related economic contributions when evaluating the financial stability. So that's a range that isn't just fees on movements, that is the revenue that's generated from other avenues within the airport to be contributing towards the overall operation of the airport. And then final point, airport operators assess the cumulative affordability impacts of proposed fees on student pilots, as we mentioned, the next generation, those flying medevacs, military or commercial airliners, instructors, aircraft owners, tenants, those that are already feeling the burden of increased fuel prices, storage, I'll get there very quickly, and small aviation businesses. There is an economy that is working against them. There is an industry and regulations that are working against them. Fees should not be one of those things working against them. We have documents we can provide which would explain a little bit better than I did. I'm sorry for going over time. That is it.
Thank you. And you're in so many working groups, you probably won't have time to play golf around here.
I don't know what free time is.
Steve, back to you.
Well, thanks very much. Be assured we work George and keep him very busy, and the industry keeps him busy with the challenge we face. So let's talk about noise, and I'll try to pick up where I left off, and I think I can do that. We started to talk about the issue of federal supremacy, and Transport Canada has a statutory process for the establishment of noise measures which must be followed if you are going to establish noise measures that are enforceable in law. Things like the noise-sensitive area is a really nice to have, but it has no teeth in law. So Transport Canada cannot do anything if pilots are not complying with the NSA. The same with the publication of the routes. They are recommendations. I will say that most pilots will follow them, but not at the expense of safety. I noted in the circuit pattern that you did that if I want to remain within gliding distance of the airport, I cannot do so and comply with your regulation. And as a pilot, safety is going to trump that. So I'd love to comply with your NSA. If I come and fly here, I will not be able to do so because safety is always paramount. And it's maybe a little, I'm going to grab my phone so it stops falling off the desk here. And it's maybe a little bit of failing what happens when we go without the process. And it's really important to look at that. Now, the process requires first quantifying documentation of the noise measures or the problem itself. So really good noise analysis. If your airport is like the rest of the airports in Canada and quite honestly around the world, it's off the departure end of the runway. We heard many of the neighbors say, I live right there, and it's every 5 minutes or less. It takes an airplane 6 minutes to go around the standard circuit pattern. That's what it takes. So depending on how many airplanes, that'll determine how much noise you have and what the duration is. Really good, reliable complaint data that hotspots them, in other words, shows where they are, is really important. Evaluation on the operational impacts when you look at these things, and considerations on what are alternate mitigation measures. And now, it was mentioned, I want to touch on that, around the publication of noise measures in the Canadian Flight Supplement that don't meet AC 302. And in fact, it was mentioned at Oshawa, and we have them. So in the Flight Supplement, and the way it works, Transport Canada is the regulator. They're the ones that get to enforce it. When a municipality develops their own standards, as you have, or as we have in Oshawa, we can request that NAV Canada publish them, as you have. NAV Canada will not say no, because they're not the regulator, and they put in the CFS what we, the airport managers, ask them to put in there. In Oshawa's case, it says flight training prior permission required. And that is so I can introduce to anyone coming our voluntary measures, because we recognize we have no authority to enforce them, because Transport Canada is the regulator. And, but it does allow us an opportunity to talk to the pilots, and we have some very reasonable measures that, to the greatest extent possible, the pilots follow them. But it's really important to understand that, that they are involuntary, and in the same as your case, there's no mechanism in law for you to enforce a standard where you're stepping into the rules of the federal government, is essentially what that is. And the measures must remain, safety must remain the primary consideration. That's point 4. So it has to measure the effect on circuit training. I mentioned the thing about moving away from the gliding path. It has to look at flight training activities. It has to look at runway use, your preferential runway, land on 11, take off on 29. Again, as conditions permit, nothing particularly wrong with that, because as permissions commit, why wouldn't the pilots help you out? And my experience is they always will. Operating hours or pilot decision-making, again, must really be taken into consider. Now, under AC 302, and we can send you a copy, you can look it up, your airport manager may have a copy. It has a statutory consultation process that must be followed. So you quantify the problem, and part of the consultation, these are the groups that you must consult with. The airport manager and the operator, well, that's you. Obviously, you're going to consult with yourself. If you have a noise management committee, then you have to consult with them. Community representatives, it's absolutely imperative we hear from the community to fully understand the impact. NAV Canada must be consulted. Airline Transportation Association of Canada, I mentioned them earlier, Canadian Business Aircraft Association, the Canadian Owners and Pilots Association, all scheduled operators who operate out of the airport, that's your scheduled passenger service, Transport Canada, and all fixed-base operators, that's your maintenance facilities. So it's a statutory requirement that those entities are consulted. And after you go through the whole consultation and come up with a solution, if you can come with consensus, you can submit that document to Transport Canada, and they will review it and then make recommendations to the minister to establish those as regulations that are then enforceable. And I would strongly encourage you to do that. I think you're doing some great things. I think some of the things you have there would be that I don't think the pilots or the minister would have a problem with, but as it stands right now, they are just voluntary because there's not enforceable law. I will mention one piece that I do have some concerns with, and to be honest, if I was the accountable executive or of the airport manager, I'm terrified by this. Let me take a glass of water and I'll tell you. So your noise procedures that you have put up basically says that the airport is open 24 hours a day, but the only person who can land at night is the emergency helicopter, right, or prior permission. And it's closed at 10 o'clock to everybody else. Again, no authority to create that regulation. If you were to bring that forward to Transport Canada or through your own SMS, I don't think you would be able to limit aircraft returning to the airport. Number one, the noise data we know shows that it's the departing of aircraft that's the problem, and the arrival is not the issue. When the airplane's, of course, coming into land, their engines are reduced, they're gliding in. And the reason they'd not likely allow that, and I would recommend you remove it immediately, is that in a scenario where someone is based here or someone is coming here and all of a sudden they start rushing their departure from the previous airport and they're rushing to get here by 10 o'clock, if that results in an aircraft accident, you may be culpable in that. That means partially responsible for. And even though they're the ones that rushed it and, you know, they flew up to Campbell River and they had dinner, they asked the fuel guy to put some fuel in, forgot to put the cap on, they're rushing to get back here, they didn't check their airplane as they're required to do, they run out of fuel and crash. They're rushing because you put in a policy that you have no authority to do. That one terrifies me as an airport manager. I would pull that tomorrow. In fact, I'd pull it today. Because again, there's no correlation between airplanes landing and noise, no reason to have it. Allow the aircraft that are based here to come back to the airport. They're not out flying around in the middle of the night, but they might be late coming back from dinner. So that would be my one recommendation, because that one terrifies me and it should terrify your accountable executive. It's also really important through this process that municipalities should not and cannot try to do an end run on the regulation. And what I mean by that, we've talked to municipalities in the past, and they said, you know what, we don't want to go through AC 302. We're just going to make it a $50 landing fee. That'll scare people away. So there you would be trying to impose a fee to work around the regulations, and it wouldn't stand up in court. Again, you'd be challenged and driven back to the AC 302 process. So very important. I think there was a proposal to have a very expensive fee for non-Qualicum Beach flight training aircraft or something if they were coming into land. There was going to be a one-time fairly expensive fee. Glad you didn't do that. That's the kind of thing that could be easily challenged. So please follow the process. Accessibility and affordability matters, and again, policies affecting airport operations should be assessed not only for their immediate local effects, but for their impacts on accessibility and affordability in the broader aviation system. Remember the quote I said, right? Your airport is part of an ecosystem across Canada supporting essential services and the important role that airports play. So when you consider reducing airport hours, it's really important to put them in that context, to keep that context alive. Now the last one here, I'm glad you said people shouldn't yell or boo, because this one always makes people's hair stand up a little bit, and including the pilots, Your Worship. But it's really important to understand there's typically three players. We heard from two of the players today, and I commend you for listening to those two. You're the third player, by the way. You, Council, are the third player. The first one, of course, are the pilots. And it's really important for the aviation community, and we will encourage our members across the country to recognize that airplanes make noise. They make noise. And we hear comments, well, the airport was here first, and the chainsaw's 140 decibels, and my airplane's 70, so it can't possibly drown it out. All of that doesn't matter. Airplanes make noise, and as pilots, we should work with you to do what we can to reduce those noise. And I think you've had some good results based on the pilots voluntarily working with you on the measures you put in place. So that's first. They're the first group, and we need to be prepared to look at measures. We need to be able to look at, or be prepared to look at new technologies as they come out. That's why we're pushing to get the federal government to allow that new category of aircraft. So there's technology out there that's quieter and gets rid of the lead, and we can't fly it in Canada. It's ridiculous. We'll fight that fight at the national level for you. The second group are you, council, right? And so the airport's been here for a very long time, and over that term, perhaps there have been some less than ideal planning decisions on the part of council that allowed that encroachment, particularly off the departure ends of the airport. So we encourage you as part of the process to recognize that part of the reason we're here today are past decisions of council, and as part of that, take that into consideration when you're moving forward. And of course, the third group are the residents, right? And again, it's really important that that they understand the role that they play in this, right? And it's simply not reasonable to expect that the airport go away. Now, the good news was I heard community members said they didn't want any of that. But I did hear them say absolutely they want flight training to go away. They want the young people of Qualicum Beach not to have a post-secondary education and move into the airline industry here in Canada. That's what they said. Everybody with a child, send your kid to some other community because we don't want any airline pilots from young people in Qualicum Beach. That's what it says when you say kick away the flight school, right? And that's what they said very clearly. And I think it's really important that community members recognize that they chose to live near an airport, that they will hear airplanes, but absolutely the community here and you as the lead want to work with them to find reasonable grounds. Kicking the flight school out, I'm going to suggest that that's a very unreasonable approach and would not likely be supported by Transport Canada through the AC 302 process. So, what do? You've heard from a lot of people, it's a new issue. You're also moving into an interesting year with a municipal election. A couple of recommendations. One, I think recognize that the existing measures you have are voluntary, and the pilots seem happy to comply with them, but recognize they're involuntary and take no punitive measures against any pilot that does not conform with them. Now, in Oshawa's case, every once in a while we get someone that messes up, and we'll usually talk to them and say, look, it's voluntary work. Most often they don't know. In my 20 years at the airport, have I heard one person that says, the heck with the community, I don't give a crap? Absolutely. But maybe 1 in 20 years. Majority of people always want to comply. So that's recommendation number 1. As I said, recommendation number 2, allow aircraft that are based here to land after 10 o'clock. Get rid of that liability. Like I said, it should scare the pants out of your accountable executive. She's going to go look up everything I'm saying and report back to you probably tomorrow that we better step into AC 302. The third recommendation is no new procedures and start the process to go through AC 302. That's the most important measure here. Don't do anything, step back, and get everybody together and start driving it through AC 302 so that you can get these rules established, rules that Transport Canada can enforce, and that everyone can begin to follow and be published clearly. And again, I think the key piece, of course, is that all stakeholders need to work towards that. Mayor, you've done an outstanding job. I've been at these meetings when there's been a lot less decorum, so thank you for doing an outstanding job in setting a pace that was reasonable for everybody to be heard. And again, as Canadian Owners and Pilots Association, we're here to help you. And I want to mention something because the ACAP funding program was mentioned, right? Now, Transport Canada is going to tell you, listen, if you submit your application, you're going to tick all the boxes, and we're going to look at it like everybody else. That's what they're going to tell you. But in reality, they've turned you down 2 years. And when they look at the Qualicum Beach Airport, they do not see consensus. They do not see community building. They do not see support for the airport. And I suggest that you're unlikely to get ACAP funding until you bring that together. But imagine next year if you can submit your ACAP funding application and you've got a letter from COPA as a letter of support, that you've got a letter from the Airline Transportation Association with support, that you've got a letter from the Canadian Business Aircraft Association supporting it, that you've got a letter from the BC General Aviation Association support it, that you've got a BCCA support. If you can bring that kind of support and show consensus to Transport Canada, then I have absolute confidence that you will get the ACAP funding. But until you do that, I think you're going to be grasping at straws, to be honest. So that's maybe the last thing to leave you with. You've got a great opportunity here to learn more about AC 302. We're happy to work with you. We know that there needs to be changes. The neighborhood has absolutely said that, and we need balanced, transparent, and consultative process to do that. And I think that you've got a great opportunity here, especially right now in July, to take a lead and step forward in a process that can work for everybody. I think that would set this council up very well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Steve. I think that is basically it. You want a question? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a question around the prior permission required. And you said that in your situation, you use it as an opportunity to introduce the rules and whatnot. Is there the opportunity to actually say yes or no, or like for that prior permission, or is it just an education?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Your Worship. We use it as a tool to introduce the voluntary measures. So there's absolutely no ability, and you have some prior permission here right now, but there's absolutely no ability to really say no. And what fears me, quite honestly, is that one of our COPA members is going to ask for permission, you're going to say no, they're going to fly in anyway, you're going to take an action against them, and we're going to be forced to step with them and defend them because of that action. So that's the challenge with the PPR, and I know you have some around the flight training, but if the helicopter company is working with them or anyone else, again, most of the time, they want to live in harmony. They don't want threats from the community. And I think part of what's happening here is you've set yourself up a little bit for failure. You've told them that we're going to create the NSAs, and I heard the neighbors say, well, there was airplanes still flying over them. Yep, because they have no foundation in law. They're a nice recommendation. And the newest one you're doing, I think, steps over a bit of a safety provision. Does that answer the question? The reality is no. And if you don't have to believe me, look on the website for Vancouver Airport. Yeah, I heard you probably heard of that airport. On there, they basically tell you, here's our noise measures. They're all established under AC 602, and you have a couple. No, the AC 302, but it's 602 is the regulation. And so in your CFS, you'll notice that you have two. The climb out straight, both runways to a certain altitude are your two noise measures that have been done. And to be honest, we put in an FOI to you and to Transport Canada because we don't have any record that we were ever consulted. I think probably we were. Some of our records are not as good as they should have been, so we've said, hey, find a record of where you went through the AC 302 process, because to be honest, that's the only way Transport should have established, but that's our issue with Transport, because we need to hold them accountable as well. And I suspect it was there, we just don't have it. And so really important, but I wanted to mention that is us that's made that request, just so we can see where it is. But if it's not done in accordance with 602, they have no foundation in law.
Councillor Harrison.
And thank you very much, Your Worship. So I don't know if this is a question for yourself or for your colleague, George, but you mentioned the transition away from lighted gasoline for avgas. Do you have a rough idea where that is? Because this is something we've sent letters in the past to the federal government, and they say, well, you trust us, we're working on it. And do you guys have a rough idea of a timeline, or is it just you'll find out when we all find out?
I'll try to answer it, and George will kick me in the shins if I'm saying it wrong. But basically, in the U.S., they've asked the fuel providers to come up with an alternative that meets an acceptable level, and they're just not quite there yet. If I had to speculate, I think we will see some product available potentially in the 3 to 5 year window. But again, it's that. But right now, they could approve it tomorrow and transport in the FAA in the U.S. We can't use it here in Canada. That's why we said to Transport Canada, put some staff on this and create the regulations. Again, where's prescriptive regulations? We have to have a regulation to allow us to do it. So we need the regulator to get off as something and get moving on that. Did I do anything wrong? Uh-oh.
I'll speak to that a little bit. One of the working groups that was mentioned was the Eliminate Aviation Gas Lead Emissions, which is an FAA initiative that we sit on. There are two current viable alternatives. Lead is sort of an essential part for high-performance engines. The majority of engines don't actually require lead and could take an unleaded source kind of tomorrow if it was available. There are two solutions available. One is made by GAMI, one is made by Swift Fuels. They're in the testing process. They need what's a piece of paper that allows them to put in every aircraft, and that isn't here right now. It's being tested. There needs to be a fuel by 2030 because the one manufacturer in the world that makes lead for leaded gasoline is about to stop producing that lead. So regardless of whether or not the aircraft can handle it, there needs to be a solution by 2030 that is mandated by the FAA, and Transport Canada will also be working to that deadline. The fuels exist. The certification process is underway. I expect it to be the next couple of years that we start seeing that in the States. And as with everything with Transport Canada and the government, it will be a few years after that that we see that in Canada. So it is on the way. It is under works. We will work to kind of roll that out as quickly as we can and assist with that.
And just one follow-up. Sorry for George. I'm glad you didn't get kicked in the shins. But would there be any thought to, I mean, obviously you have to test for every different type of engine.
Yes.
It's enormously time-consuming to do that.
Yes.
Has there been any thought of prioritizing the most broadly commonly used, like sort of models of Cessna engine, basically the most generic?
It's a difficult thing with the paperwork that's required for a certification of a fuel, because you need what's known as an AMLSTC, which is it's kind of aircraft industry-wide for a fuel type, unlike an STC that would traditionally be a supplemental type certificate that would be created aircraft by aircraft. With something like a fuel, unfortunately, it is a bit of a blanket approval. There are two kind of big manufacturers of aircraft. One of them has said, yes, you can put unleaded fuel in all of our engines. The other manufacturer said, no, we need to test all of them individually, and that's what's kind of taking up the process, and they won't get certification until it's kind of across all aircraft types.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Question for Stephen. You mentioned that you recommended an expert aviation person to mediate for us. What would the cost be, and are they readily available to be hired?
Certainly, and through you, Your Worship. There are a number of great aviation consulting companies in Canada. Any one of them could lead you through the process. You could also lead yourself through the process. And I will tell you that we went through the process in Oshawa. We did not have consensus. And Council was pushing for more than the aviation community could accept. Transport Canada declined our request. And even though we had a consultant and we did all the work, we didn't have consensus. So whatever you do, you need to strive towards consensus. It's certainly something you could do. I'd be happy to share our document with you. Or there are some great consultants, and again, on behalf of COPA, we'd be happy to share the names of a few that you could reach out to and get a sense as to what the cost would be. You're well on the way because you've already heard really well from the community, so I think you could quantify your problem here very quickly. And I think if you got the right people in a room, I know you have the airport manager as a steering committee that he, whatever you call the right committee that he has with some aviation users. I think use a component of that, bring in some of the community, and try to find some middle ground. I think you could get some early wins really quickly because I think some of the things you're already doing. So you could actually advance some of the ones you have very quickly through the process to make the submission to transport. And the document's very clear. Do these, it's sort of like applying for a building permit. Tick all the boxes, here's your building permit. Follow the AC process. I think you could submit some early wins. Some of the more complicated ones, when we start thinking about limiting flight training and those really complex issues, that's going to take a little bit longer to find some consensus. And but I think you really do it in 2 stages. And again, be happy to give you some names of some great consultants who could help you through that.
Would you send that information to our CEO and our airport manager?
Absolutely happy to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. With that,